There's a quiet kind of suffering that doesn't scream. It hides behind the smiles of people who constantly say, "I'm fine." They rarely ask for help. They often apologize too much, and deep down, carry a haunting thought. I'm a burden to the people I love. You'll notice them in conversations. They hesitate before speaking, afraid they're taking up too much space. They'll offer help easily, but when it comes to receiving it, they retreat. Not because they daren't trust others, but because they daren't trust their own worth. What creates this psychology, this invisible weight that makes someone believe their existence is a problem? Is it childhood conditioning, trauma, emotional neglect, or the slow erosion of self-worth caused by rejection and misunderstanding? And more importantly, how does a mind reach a point where even love feels like guilt? People who feel like a burden are not weak. Many of them are the most empathetic souls you'll ever meet. They are often the ones who care too deeply, think too much, and love too silently. But beneath that tenderness lies a deep internal narrative, one that whispers, "You are too much, you are inconvenient, you are replaceable." This mindset doesn't appear overnight. It's learned through moments when someone was made to feel like their needs were excessive, their pain was annoying, or their presence was costly. Over time, the human brain designed to protect begins to adapt by minimizing itself. It says, "If I shrink, I won't bother anyone." But the tragedy is, this shrinking becomes a form of emotional exile. The person detaches, not because they want isolation, but because they believe it's the only way to not hurt anyone else. It's self-erasure, disguised as kindness. In this episode, we're going to explore that psychology. Why do some people live their lives feeling like they are burdens to others, even when they are deeply loved? What's happening inside their minds, their emotions, and their memories? And how can one begin to unlearn this belief, to exist without apology, and to understand that needing others is not weakness, but human nature itself? Because at the core of this mindset lies one of the most misunderstood truths of all, that being cared for does not make you a burden. It makes you human. To understand the mind of someone who always feels like a burden, we have to go back far beyond their adult insecurities or recent experiences. We have to look into the subtle, emotional architecture that was built during their earliest years when love was first being defined. The origin of the belief, emotional conditioning. When a child grows up in an environment where their emotions are met with irritation, indifference, or silence, the brain learns something powerful. Love is conditional. Every time they cry, they're told to stop being dramatic, or if their sadness is treated as an inconvenience. Begin to equate emotional expression with rejection. Over time, the child learns that needing attention or comfort brings conflict, not care, so they adapt. It's not that they want to be alone. They simply believe that being open leads to being unwanted. This is how the seed is planted. A child who feels emotionally neglected becomes an adult who feels emotionally excessive. They carry the silent belief, "I must not ask for too much, or people will leave." The hidden mechanism, guilt as a survival strategy in psychology. Guilt can be both adaptive and destructive. Adaptive guilt helps us correct mistakes and maintain empathy. But destructive guilt, the kind rooted in shame, becomes a constant internal noise. For people who feel like a burden, guilt isn't a momentary emotion, it's a state of being. By feeling guilty first, they believe they can prevent rejection. If I already punish myself, their subconscious says, no one else will have to. It's self-protection through self-blame. A tragic irony, hurting yourself to avoid being hurt. For stop distinguishing between "I did something wrong" and "I am something wrong." Because love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability, for them, feels like exposure to judgment. The role of early responsibility and over-adaptation. Another common thread among those who feel like a burden is early over-responsibility. Maybe they had to emotionally support a parent or grow up too fast because of instability, illness, or chaos. They become experts at sensing other people's moods, adjusting their tone, suppressing their own emotions, solving problems that were never theirs to solve. This hyper-awareness, known in psychology as hypervigilance, becomes their way of surviving. But what begins as survival turns into identity. They learn to exist primarily for others. And when they finally find themselves in relationships where someone tries to care for them, they freeze. They don't know how to receive love because love feels like a debt. They think, if someone is kind to me, I owe them something. If they help me, I must repay it. If I can't, I'm a burden. Their nervous system equates care with obligation, not connection. The inner dialogue, the voice of self-blame, if you could hear the internal monologue of someone who constantly feels like a burden, it would sound something like this. I shouldn't have said that. They're probably tired of me. I always mess things up. They have their own problems. I shouldn't add mine. It's a stream of thought that punishes them for existing too loudly. And this internal dialogue often runs automatically without conscious awareness. In cognitive behavioral terms, these are core beliefs, deeply ingrained schemas formed through repeated emotional experiences. No amount of reassurance easily rewires them, because even when others say you're not a burden, their mind translates it as they're just being nice. The brain doesn't accept new data until the emotional pattern is re-experienced differently, until someone not only says you're not a burden, but proves it consistently through presence, patience, and empathy. The role of culture in society. This mindset doesn't just come from personal trauma. It's also reinforced by culture. We live in a world that glorifies independence and self-sufficiency. We're told to not need anyone to be strong, to handle your own problems. But the human psyche was never designed for isolation. We evolved as interdependent beings. Our nervous systems literally regulate each other through presence, eye contact, and shared emotion. Yet, the modern ideal teaches the opposite, that needing others is weakness and self-reliance is virtue. So, when someone feels broken, tired, or emotionally dependent, they internalize shame. They believe they've failed some invisible standard of strength. They say, I should be able to handle this myself. And when they can't, they feel like a burden. This cultural illusion of independence has made loneliness the default emotion of our time. And it quietly feeds the psychology of those who already feel like they take up too much space. The attachment framework from a psychological standpoint. This burden complex often aligns with anxious or fearful avoidant attachment styles. People with anxious attachment constantly fear being too much. They worry their needs will push others away. People with fearful avoidant attachment simultaneously crave closeness but fear rejection so deeply that they sabotage intimacy before it can reject them. In both cases, the emotional logic is, if I don't ask for too much, maybe they'll stay. If I hide my pain, maybe I'll be loved. But this logic backfires because, by hiding, they deny others the chance to love them for who they are. Their relationships become one-sided, built on performance instead of presence. And ironically, the very fear of being a burden makes them withdraw, which in turn creates distance and isolation, confirming the very belief they were afraid of. The compassion trap. Many people who feel like burdens are extremely compassionate. They are the friends who check in first, the partners who notice subtle changes in mood, the colleagues who over-apologize for minor mistakes. Their empathy radar is finely tuned, but beneath that kindness lies exhaustion, the silent fatigue of constantly managing others' emotions. Psychologically, this is called compulsive caretaking, a coping mechanism to earn belonging through usefulness. If I can't be loved for who I am, the subconscious says, I'll be loved for what I do. So they overgive, they overextend, become indispensable, but secretly hope someone will notice their pain without having to ask. When no one does, it reinforces the old wound. See, no one cares unless I'm useful. Thus, the compassion becomes both a gift and a curse, a way to connect, but also a mask that hides loneliness. The neuroscience of feeling like a burden. On a neurological level, the feeling of being a burden activates brain regions associated with social pain, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. These are the same areas activated during physical pain. Okay? That's why emotional rejection or perceived disapproval hurts so viscerally. The brain processes social exclusion as physical injury. This is important because it explains why reassurance alone doesn't fix the feeling. When someone who feels like a burden apologizes for existing, they're not performing drama. Their brain is signaling danger. To them, connection feels unsafe, not because people are cruel, but because their neural pathways have been wired to associate closeness with potential rejection. Healing, therefore, isn't about simply thinking positive. It requires retraining the nervous system, teaching it that presence is safe, that love doesn't always end in abandonment, and that being cared for doesn't demand repayment. Case illustration. The invisible friend. Consider a man named Daniel. He's the kind of friend who never calls first, not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't want to bother anyone. K listens deeply when others vent, but rarely shares his own struggles. K. When people cancel plans, he immediately assumes they're tired of him. K. He spends nights replaying conversations, overanalyzing every word he said, wondering if he came across as too much. Even when someone offers genuine affection, he deflects it with humor. Inside, Daniel's biggest fear isn't loneliness, it's being unwanted. His story isn't rare. It's a story of millions who walk through life quietly apologizing for their existence, not because they were broken, but because at some point, love became conditional, and their heart never forgot the lesson. The paradox of connection. Here lies the paradox. People who feel like burdens often give others the very love they deny themselves. They become safe havens for others, emotional anchors, the calm presence everyone seeks. Yet, when it's their turn to lean, they can't. They crumble alone, thinking they're protecting others from their pain. But in doing so, they deprive others of the chance to love them. Because real love isn't one-sided care, it's mutual vulnerability. Sometimes, the most healing thing you can do for someone who loves you is to let them help you. It's the fear of being a burden. It's the fear of losing worth when you stop performing. It's the belief that love must be earned, not received. Then that's the illusion that must be dismantled for healing to begin. Let us step deeper, beyond theory and observation, into the quiet, emotional landscape of this psychology. 'Cause to feel like a burden is not merely a cognitive distortion. It's a form of identity. It's the point where pain becomes personality and survival strategies become character traits. The emotional logic of self-erasure. The human brain is designed to prioritize connection. For our ancestors, rejection meant death. So, when love or acceptance was linked to self-suppression, the brain made a trade-off. Better to disappear than to be abandoned. This emotional logic is invisible, but powerful. It's why so many kind, self-aware people struggle with guilt simply for taking up space. It's not low self-esteem, it's adaptive self-protection. In their minds, invisibility equals safety. Silence equals control. They have internalized that if they minimize their presence, they can maintain peace. Okay? And that belief, though born from fear, often makes them look humble, calm, or selfless. Okay? But underneath that calm exterior lies chronic emotional fatigue. Because constantly monitoring your impact on others is like carrying a weight that never leaves your shoulders. Okay. Existential roots. The philosophy of worth, if we look at this through a philosophical lens, it's not just about psychology, it's about existential worth. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people." But for people who feel like burdens, hell is themselves in the eyes of other people. They imagine being seen as too much, too needy, too heavy, and that imagined perception becomes reality inside their mind. It's a distorted mirror. They see themselves only through the lens of imagined inconvenience. This philosophical wound runs deep because it challenges a core human question. What makes me worthy of love if I stop being useful? In modern society, productivity has replaced humanity as the measure of value. We're told we're valuable when we produce, when we achieve, when we serve. So, when someone's exhausted, grieving, or broken, when they can't contribute, they feel disposable. This mindset infects our most intimate spaces. Love becomes transactional. Friendship becomes a negotiation of usefulness. Can those who can, perform emotionally or materially, begin to withdraw, convinced that their rest is someone else's burden. The mirror of empathy. Why they feel so much. There's another paradox here. The people who feel like burdens often possess extraordinary empathy. They can read subtle emotions, tone shifts, body language, even micro-expressions that others miss. They are, in essence, emotional mirrors, reflecting everyone's feelings, but rarely their own. But empathy, without boundaries, becomes self-sacrifice. When you can feel everyone's pain, but never voice your own, your soul becomes a sponge, saturated and heavy. This is why so many empaths burn out quietly. They confuse empathy with responsibility. They believe feeling another's suffering means they must fix it. And when they can't, guilt rises, another confirmation of being a burden. It's an endless loop. The more they care, the more they blame themselves for not doing enough. True empathy, however, doesn't demand self-erasure. It requires self-anchoring, knowing that you can care without collapsing. That distinction marks the difference between compassion and martyrdom, love, guilt, and the illusion of debt. If you listen closely, you'll notice that people who feel like burdens often speak in the language of debt. I owe you. You didn't have to do that. I feel bad for making you worry. It's as if affection must always be repaid. Psychologically, this stems from conditional love. Early experiences where love came with strings attached. Behavior, silence, performance. So, when unconditional care finally arrives, it feels suspicious. They wait for the price tag. When none appears, they create one in their mind, through guilt. This illusion of debt destroys intimacy. Love thrives on mutual exchange, not accounting. You don't have to earn a hug or repay concern with self-punishment. But for someone whose childhood taught them that affection must be justified, peace feels like theft. The mask of strength. Let's talk about strength, the kind that hides pain behind composure. Many who feel like burdens appear strong, even stoic. They're the dependable ones. It's the ones who say, I'm okay, no matter how heavy their heart feels. But their strength is defensive, not empowering. It's a wall built from fear. Fear that showing cracks will push people away. Society often praises this false strength. You're so resilient. People say, unaware that resilience is often just endurance in disguise. But real strength isn't silence. It's vulnerability without shame. It's saying, I'm struggling, and trusting that love will remain. When we glorify stoicism without context, we reinforce the very belief that ruins connection, that being in pain makes you inconvenient. The spiritual dimension, the silent cry for permission. On a spiritual level, people who feel like burdens often carry an unconscious prayer. Please, let me exist without guilt. They don't need validation as much as permission. Permission to rest, to be flawed, to be carried, for once. In many philosophical traditions, from Buddhism to existentialism, suffering is not seen as failure, but as a fundamental part of being human. Yet modern culture treats it as contamination, something to hide. So those who struggle internally begin to see themselves as bad energy, as if their sadness pollutes the joy of others. But here's the truth. No one is pure light. Every relationship, every soul, carries both joy and shadow. To feel like a burden is to forget that even pain has value, that your vulnerability can become someone else's mirror of compassion. Reflection. The inner dialogue shift healing begins when the internal dialogue starts to change. Instead of I'm bothering them, it becomes I'm giving them a chance to love me. Instead of they're tired of me, it becomes they're choosing to stay. This cognitive shift doesn't happen through logic alone. It happens through experience. Through small moments where vulnerability is met with gentleness instead of rejection. Through friendships where silence is accepted, not judged. Through partners who say, you don't have to apologize for existing. These moments reteach the nervous system what safety feels like. They rewire the association between need and shame. Slowly, the internal narrative, once dominated by guilt, becomes a dialogue of grace. It's the shadow side of self-reliance. One of the hardest realizations for people who feel like burdens is that their independence, the trait they be proudest of, may also be their prison. They've built their identity around not needing anyone. It gives them control. It keeps rejection at bay. But it also keeps love out. There's a difference between independence and isolation. Independence says, I can stand on my own. Isolation says, I must stand on my own. The first is freedom. The second is fear. And yet, society rarely distinguishes between the two. When you've spent a lifetime equating reliance with weakness, the idea of leaning on someone feels like emotional theft. But connection isn't theft, it's reciprocity. Every time you allow someone to care for you, you're not taking, you're giving them purpose. Philosophical reframing from burden to belonging. Let's reframe this belief through a philosophical lens. What if feeling like a burden is not evidence of weakness, but proof of awareness? Proof that you understand the weight of emotions, the cost of empathy, the fragility of connection. In that sense, this self-perception isn't pathology, it's sensitivity misdirected inward. You're not broken, you're aware. The task is to redirect that sensitivity outward toward compassion for yourself. Because what is belonging if not the courage to exist as you are, needs and all? Belonging is not earned by usefulness, steved through authenticity. The poet David White once wrote, you must learn to walk the earth as if you deserve to be here. That's the heart of this healing. Reclaiming the quiet right to take up space without apology, letting others in. The hardest, but most transformative act for someone who feels like a burden is to let others help. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary for them to accept help without deflection, to rest without guilt, to be held without feeling small. Because allowing others to love you is not selfish, it's connective. It teaches both sides of the relationship what real intimacy feels like. It replaces performance with presence. And once that happens, love shifts from transaction to truth. The slow art of healing this mindset, doesn't mean waking up one morning suddenly confident. It's gradual, like thawing ice. It begins with noticing the small apologies that escape your mouth automatically, with catching the thought, I'm being too much, and gently asking, says who? It's about reparenting yourself, becoming the voice you needed as a child. A voice that says, you are not a burden. You are allowed to need. You are allowed to rest. And perhaps, most importantly, you are not hard to love. This is the voice that rebuilds self-trust. Because at the root of every I am a burden belief lies a rupture in trust. The trust that others can hold your humanity without judgment. Relearning that trust takes time, but it's possible.